It's almost set.
Did you get the number, Mr. Anderson?
Sorry?
Did you get the number?
My legal assistant just when I got, she's got everything.
You have everything?
She's got everything she needs,
Okay.
including the number, yes, sir. Thank you.
Jury.
All right, let me call the next witness. Jury's present and seated.
Thank you, Judge. State would call Omar Felix.
Jury, put that witness on.
Mr. Felix, if you'll come forward, please.
Your Honor,
Huh?
did you put the witness on?
I did.
Yep. Sir, is you ready to be sworn in, please?
Solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Yes, I do.
Are you still around here? Good afternoon. Make sure you get close to the microphone so the viewers can hear you, okay?
Okay.
Okay, proceed.
Yes, sir. Give me a second to set up. You ready, sir?
Yes, sir.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury, spell your last name?
Sure, my name is Omar Felix. Last name is spelled Felix.
Where do you work right now, sir?
Right now, I'm currently employed as a firearms examiner with the Unified Metropolitan Forensic Crime Laboratory, and that's in Inglewood, Colorado.
Is that a government-like lab to assist some of the agencies in that area with firearms examination?
Yes, it's a crime lab. Different agencies contribute to the crime laboratory, so it's technically a county crime lab. Crime laboratory, the last word, yes.
Prior to working in Colorado, where did you work, sir?
I worked for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office for 15 years as a firearms examiner also.
Prior to working for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office as a firearms examiner, did you work anywhere else?
Yes, I worked for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's Orlando Crime Laboratory, again in the same capacity as a firearms examiner.
How long were you with FDLE for?
I was with FDLE for approximately 7 years.
Can you take us back to 1999, 2001, when you first became a firearms examiner, and tell us a little bit about your training and experience?
Sure. My training encompassed a year and a half of training in firearms identification, and that encompassed anything from firearms history, firearms function, and also microscopic identification of fired components, fired bullets, fired casings, to determine whether they were fired in the same firearm or not. There was also firearm history, and also, as I mentioned before, firearm function, also assembly and disassembly. So it is a year and a half of training of purely forensic firearms identification.
After that training with FDLE, did you go through some, someone training you, like you were assigned as like a trainee for an individual?
I was a trainee. That's part of the training. Usually it's about 6 months of supervised casework as part of the training before independent casework begins. It's pretty standard training.
Now, during the course of your time with Florida Department of Law Enforcement and also the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and in your present position, do you go annually through proficiency training or proficiency evaluations?
Yes, every year a proficiency test is required, and then the laboratory that's accredited submits that to show that I am proficient in firearms identification. Yes.
So a proficiency test is basically a blind test that's given to you annually. You have to get it right, and they check on you to make sure that's correct?
Yes, what happens is that you submit your answers, and then the independent company that makes the test then releases the results, and then the laboratory determines whether you're correct or not.
Over the last 22 years, how many about firearms and also casings and projectiles have you compared and examined?
Over that time period, thousands of fired components, bullets, fired casings, and firearms also.
Have you testified in court as an expert in firearm identification?
Yes.
About how many times do you think, sir?
Well, I've lost track over about 120, anywhere between 120 and 130 times, but I lost track, but it's somewhere in between there.
Now, when you were FDLE, did you testify in, the central area of the state?
Yes, FDLE is a state laboratory, so the surrounding counties is where I testified for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And then there were a handful of times that I've testified in the federal court system, again, depending on the case that I worked.
Once you're with Palm Beach County, was most of your testimony in the Palm Beach County area?
Yes. And then again, there were some occasions where I had the opportunity to testify in federal court. But again, it was in the Palm Beach County area.
What is your educational background, if you could, sir?
Sure, I have a bachelor's degree in forensic science from the University of Central Florida, and I also have a master's degree in applied psychology from Lynn University.
Are you a member of any professional organizations to deal with firearms examination?
Yes, I'm a distinguished member of the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners, which is an international organization of examiners and toolmark examiners, where we have yearly seminars and yearly teaching of classes to exchange information of new technologies in forensic firearms identification.
In order to be part of AFTE, you have to actually be a firearm and toolmark examiner?
Yes, primarily you have to have your primary source of income as a firearm and toolmark examiner, correct.
Have you published any peer-reviewed papers in the area of firearms examination and identification?
Yes, I believe four papers and probably some coming up soon that have been published and peer-reviewed in the Journal of the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners.
Do you receive continuing training in your area of expertise on an annual basis?
Yes, again, required to be a certified examiner with the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners. Continuing education is required every year, and I also give training also to other firearms examiners for continuing education units for the association.
Now, if you could tell the jury, what is firearms identification, and what does it really make possible through your field? What are you able to do?
Well, firearms identification is a discipline of forensic science which gives the examiner the ability to determine whether a fired bullet or fired casing was fired from a particular firearm, if it's submitted, or if the firearm is submitted to determine whether they were fired from the same unknown firearm. And basically what happens is that at the microscopic level, all firearms are unique. They all have, for lack of a better phrase, their own fingerprint. So when a shooter shoots a gun, the fingerprint is then imparted onto the fired casing, or it scratches the bullet in a specific way that can then be identified or linked back to the firearm that fired it.
Can I borrow your exhibit for a second, sir?
Sure. This is just a demonstrative aid that I,
Yes, sir. Judge, may I approach the witness?
Right.
I know you mentioned, may I have the witness step down, Judge?
You can.
Do you mind stepping down over here?
sure, no problem.
I know you had mentioned a casing and a projectile. We have an exhibit we'll use for demonstrative purposes only. Can you use this to explain to the jurors the different parts of a whole bullet, we'll call it, whatever your words that you use, and then the different pieces we're going to deal with today, sir?
Sure, so this is a demonstrative aid which shows an unfired piece of ammunition. An unfired piece of ammunition is actually called a cartridge. So a cartridge is composed basically of four parts. You have the first part, which is the casing, which is the outer shell. Usually it's made out of brass or aluminum or even nickel. And at the bottom of the casing, there's a small little disc, which is called a primer. Now, the primer, its sole purpose is that when the firing mechanism, the firing pin or hammer hits the primer, it creates a spark. And that's all it does. It creates a spark which ignites the gunpowder, which is the third component of a cartridge. And when that gunpowder ignites, essentially creates an explosion. That explosion is what ignites and pushes the bullet, which is the projectile, which is the last component, out of the barrel and towards the target. So the four main components are the cartridge, case on the outside, the primer, the gunpowder, and then the projectile or bullet. Sometimes it is referred to, sometimes incorrectly, as a bullet, the entire unit, but it's actually, the terminology is actually a cartridge.
And if I can ask you, the cartridge, so when the, what do we call this, a bullet or
The
projectile?
bullet
that
or
comes out?
projectile is the same term, yeah.
So when a bullet exits we'll call this the casing?
The casing, yes.
Okay. This would normally go out the front of a gun and hit whatever target or where it's supposed to?
Correct. It'll travel down the barrel, and actually within the barrel, there's a series of grooves that are actually manufactured inside of the barrel, which actually impart a twist on the projectile as it travels down the barrel. And what this does is it creates a spin on the bullet, which creates a gyroscopic effect, which is for accuracy. So it's sort of like a quarterback throwing the football. You give it a little bit of a spin for accuracy. So these grooves are now impressed onto the bullet as it's traveling down the barrel.
And after a bullet goes out of the barrel, basically what's left is a casing, right?
Correct. And what happens actually, that actually happens simultaneously. Every action has an opposite and equal reaction. So when the cartridge detonates, it pushes the bullet down the barrel, but also what it does is it pushes the casing back up against what's called the slide of a semi-automatic pistol, and pushes that slide back, and which at that point, at its rearward most point, would eject the empty casing out, and then the slide would come forward, which would strip another unfired cartridge into the chamber, ready to be fired once again.
And that would be a semi-automatic. If this was a revolver, the casing would stay in the chamber like the old pea shooters, like from cowboys. They would just go in circles.
Exactly. It's a different system. So there's two different types of handguns, basically. There's a pistol, which operates just as I described. It would automatically extract, eject, and load a new cartridge into the firearm, ready to be fired again. And this continuously happens again and again until the shooter doesn't pull the trigger anymore, or you run out of ammunition. A revolver, however, operates differently in that, as you described, it's almost like a cowboy gun is really sort of the way to think about it, in which revolver, how that works is you have multiple cylinders around a rotating cylinder. So you have multiple chambers around a cylinder. When the shooter pulls the trigger and the cartridge goes off, the bullet comes out the barrel, but nothing happens to the casing. It stays within that cylinder. And then this cylinder keeps rotating until you run out of ammunition. The shooter then has to manually open up the cylinder, manually release the empty casings, manually reload it, and then close it and shoot it again. So it's two different operating systems.
Excellent. If you don't mind sitting down, and we'll use this later again,
Okay.
if that's okay.
No problem.
So as part of firearms identification, are you able to compare what would be the projectile or bullet to possibly another projectile or bullet, or possibly to a gun that would have fired it?
Yes, as I described before, the gun itself has individual characteristics, individual details that's scratched on the bullet as it's traveling down the barrel. So as I mentioned before, the grooves that are cut, that the manufacturer actually cuts inside of the barrel, as it would actually scratches the bullet as it's traveling down the barrel out towards the target.
And then casing's the same thing. Are you able to match a casing up to either a specific gun or to other casings that could have been fired from that gun?
Yes, and how that works is it's just a different part of the firearm. Typically what happens is that on the casing itself, I can look at the primer, as I was talking about before, is now impressed with both the firing pin impression, the impression made by the firing pin. The back of the slide has individual characteristics, is now impressed onto the casing, and even the sidewalls of the casing have imperfections or impressions of the individual characteristics of the gun. Then what I can do in the laboratory is compare them to each other. And how I do that is using what's called a comparison microscope. And a comparison microscope, all that is two microscopes connected so I could see both sides at the same time. So what I would do is take one casing, for example, put it on one side, another casing, put it on the other, and I can view them at the same time through the microscope and then look for the same patterns. And if they have the same pattern, they were fired from the same firearm.
And each firearm would have individual characteristics for casing markings and also for projectile markings?
Correct.
And we had, it came across earlier, are you able to tell, I'll come back to that, strike that. Let me ask you, were you assigned any items from FDLE case number 2006 0500762 to conduct an examination and analysis on?
Yes, I was, yes.
Do you know when you received those items?
I received them on or around March of 2006.
What items did you receive, sir?
In this particular case, I received a 40 Smith & Wesson 10 millimeter auto caliber copper jacketed bullet and one fired 40 Smith & Wesson caliber federal cartridge case.
Let's start with the, we have an evidence as states 17. If you can, sir, you can take a look at this. Can I have you step down?
Sure.
Judge Ramsden, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Do you need your report, or are you okay?
So
So can you take a look at this, see if you recognize, and see if this is one of those two exhibits you were talking about that you had received?
Let's see. Normally, what I'm looking for is information on the package, because I would initial and document. Can I see the other side?
Yes, sir.
Yes, my initials and case number are actually written on the package itself, just identifying it that I actually analyzed the contents of this envelope.
And I'm showing you what's in it, state 17. Can you describe what this is and tell us if it matches up to your FDLE case number also?
I would need the other side, yes. Yes, it is the FDLE case number, and also, as I mentioned before, it has the initials on the envelope, so it does match my report.
And this item here, is this the projectile you were talking about, one of the items you received?
Yes, it appears to be from, it is, yes.
Now, looking at our little diagram here, is this, which one of those things would this be?
Well, what this is a fired bullet, so it would be a fired bullet or projectile is what came out of the barrel.
When you received this, did you, I guess, do an examination on it to determine if you could tell the caliber it is and, you know, what sort of gun it might have been from?
Yes, what I did was I conducted basically a standard examination in which I examined certain aspects of the projectile to determine caliber, which caliber, all that is essentially just the size of projectile. A manufacturer will design a specific firearm for a specific size of ammunition, so the shooter knows what ammunition to use in that firearm. And caliber is essentially just the diameter of the projectile, and the simplest way to explain it is that it can be either described in inches or in metric. So if something is approximately 0.40 inches in diameter, it would be called a 40 caliber. Or in metric, it would be about 10 millimeters. So in what I found here in this particular projectile is when I examined it, it was a roughly 0.40 inches in diameter, or around 10 millimeters in diameter. So it was a 40 caliber projectile, or 40 caliber bullet.
Did you also weigh the bullet to determine its weight, to see if that would be consistent with a 40 caliber bullet?
Yes, it's also another factor I take into determining caliber is the weight of the bullet.
What was the weight, if you know, of this bullet? And if you need to reference your file?
Can I just quickly reference? When I weighed the bullet, it was 180.2 grains. And grains, just as an explanation, grains is just a unit of weight that's used in firearms. That's all that means.
And in this case right here, would that be consistent with a 40 caliber projectile?
Yes.
Were you able to look at this projectile and see if it had some specific markings that would assist you in identifying possibly the type of gun that fired it?
Yes, so as part of the examination, what I also look for is the rifling marks that I was talking about before, the number of grooves that are cut inside of a barrel. And also what I would also do is also measure the width of those grooves. And what that does is, using those values, I could use what's called a general rifling characteristics database. And all that is a database that used to be maintained by the FBI. It's no longer maintained by them. It's now maintained by the Association of Firearm Toolmark Examiners. And all that is a database in which I can input the information, the caliber of the projectile, the number of the grooves that are on the bullet, and also the width and dimensions of these grooves. And what will come back is a list of possible firearms that may have fired that bullet. And what that's used for is it's an investigative aid for the investigators to try to get, again, a possible list of firearms to look out for.
Let me ask this, what was the grooves? Is there a wording you use in your profession like that would be common to describe what you saw with the markings from this projectile?
The standard wording would be just the number of grooves, which would be 5 or 6 or whatever that you found, and then the direction of twist, because the manufacturer can make the bullet rotate to the left or rotate to the right. In this particular projectile, what I found is that it had 5 of the grooves and twisted to the right.
And we'll come back to identifying that in a minute.
Okay?
May I have the witness step down again, Judge?
You
You step down, I'm showing you what's in evidence of states 16. You could take a moment and look at this, and then also the back here. If you need me to pull it up more, let me know.
No, that's okay. But again, I could see my initials and case number, FDLE case number on the envelope itself. So I examined the contents of this envelope.
And what was in this envelope? What was this?
In this particular envelope was a 40 Smith & Wesson caliber cartridge case, a fired cartridge case.
So do you mind grabbing what that would be from there? Okay.
Yeah, basically what it is, it's a 40 Smith & Wesson caliber cartridge case. And just, again, just so to be clear, the reason I would know that information is because it's actually stamped on the cartridge case itself. Again, there's something called a head stamp on the casing, which is basically around the primer, and it would say 40 S&W caliber. S&W is just part of the name of the caliber. What's important is the 40, so that the shooter knows exactly what type of firearm to fire the cartridge in. So that's why it's stamped on there. So what was on the outside was 40 Smith & Wesson, so it would be a fired cartridge case.
Now, this cartridge case, for your FDLE case number that we talked about before, and then the projectile, were those both associated with being found at the murder of, or the site where Julie Green was located? If you can check your records.
Yes,
I know you don't know, but what you have notated.
Yes, the last name, yes, but I don't have an exact location, or I don't know where it was collected. It's collected by a crime scene unit and then submitted to the laboratory, so I don't know the exact location.
Yes, sir. And on this casing right here, were you able to locate any specific markings on it that you would have later been able to identify to a possible other case?
Yes, well, the casing itself had markings, a few things. They were consistent with being fired from a pistol, as I mentioned before. There were two types of firearms. So there were markings on there that showed that it was fired from a pistol and not a revolver. But then again, it also had some markings on it that I could use, if given another piece of ammunition, to look under the microscope to determine whether they were fired in the same firearm or not.
And now, once you were able to look at both these items in conjunction, you checked that database. Were you able to locate any firearm that had 5, I guess, lands and grooves and a twist to the right? Or was there something that came up peculiar that you had to research?
Well, essentially, what I would be using is actually the fired bullet. As I mentioned before, I would enter it into that database to get a list of firearms. In this particular case, when I put it into the database, the only thing that came back as a result was actually revolver. Now, that was inconsistent with what I had because of the casing. So it was an unusual find at the time. So what I had to do is actually confer with other examiners because it was an unusual case. There was nothing in the database, which is again unusual. The Association of Firearms and Tool Mark Examiners has a forum, a closed forum, so we could discuss not specifics of a case, but we can discuss with other examiners any unusual findings, anything interesting. When I went to the forum, it actually turned out that within the last 6 months of me researching the bullet, we're finding the same issue. It wasn't in the database. It was unusual. Cases were popping up in San Francisco, Kansas, one in Kentucky, with this unusual rifling. Upon further research, we determined that there could have only been one firearm that could have fired and had these 5 grooves and twisted to the right, which had recently been manufactured within the last year at the time, around 2004, 2005. And that was a Smith & Wesson model SW40VE.
So you had to research that and consult with other folks. Subsequent to this, during the course of this investigation, were you provided multiple other Smith & Wesson VE40 caliber projectiles to analyze or to review?
Yes, after I worked the case, I was receiving multiple bullets and fired casings to determine whether any of these bullets were fired in any of those firearms that were submitted by the other outside agencies.
During the course of that, did you have an opportunity to analyze multiple other projectiles that were fired from a Smith & Wesson 40 VE that showed those 5 lands and grooves and then the right twist?
Yes, yes, I was.
And subsequent, when you checked the database a year or so later, whenever it was the Smith & Wesson 40 VE added to the database at that point?
Yes, it was. At the time, the database by the FBI was updated once a year. So essentially what happened was that the firearm was so new that it hadn't been updated in the database yet. So that's why when myself and other firearms examiners entered that information as with the 5 lanes and grooves or just 5 grooves that twisted to the right, nothing came back. It was that new. So the firearm had to have come out within the last year and a half or so. Again, because the database hadn't been updated yet.
Thank you. I can have you sit back now for a few minutes. Call you back up. Once you determined that, in your opinion as a firearm examiner expert, that it was a Smith & Wesson VE, a 40 VE, did you give that information to law enforcement or let them know so they can try and be looking for that firearm?
Yes, that was provided to law enforcement for them to look for that particular make and model.
Were you also assigned a cartridge case from FDLE case number 2006-0502-723 to conduct an examination on?
Yes, I was.
Was that casing, the information provided to you that was located at the homicide scene of Miss Patton, Iwana Patton?
Yes, that's what I have listed as the victim's name, last name Patton, yes.
Can I approach the witness, Judge?
You may.
Can I show you what's been marked in evidence of states 22? May I have the witness step down again, Judge?
Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Good exercise. So can you look at State's Exhibit 22? Let us know if you can identify this as that same casing that you analyzed.
Again, I would have to look at the
Yes, sir.
opposite side. Yes, again, it has my case numbers and my initials on the envelope, so I examined the contents of the envelope.
And also, do you actually write in these casings too, on the inside?
Yes, it's actually written on the inside of the mouth is the case number and my initials, again, just so it doesn't rub off on the outside of the evidence, but my initials will be on the inside of the casing of the mouth.
Did you conduct that same examination on this casing to look at it to see if it had markings that you might be able to compare up to the casing from the Julie Green site?
Yes, in this particular case, because all I received was a casing, I was able to look at the markings, as I mentioned before, on the outside of the casing and on the bottom of the casing, or the primer, where those individual characteristics were impressed onto the casing. So what I was asked to do was compare the fire casing in this case to the other case, the green case in 762, FDLE case number last 3762, using the comparison microscope.
And we'll talk about that in one moment. Or before we do that, were you able to, just by looking at the markings on this casing, were you able to make a determination as to whether or not it was fired from a pistol or from a revolver?
Again, looking at this cartridge case, I was able to determine that it was fired from a pistol due to the markings on the casing itself. And again, the head stamp or the markings on the outside said that it was a 40 Smith & Wesson caliber cartridge case.
And now I'm showing you, along with 22, 16. 16 is the casing from the Julie Green, and 22 is a casing from Patton. Did you have an opportunity to compare these on the microscope to make a determination if they were fired from the same firearm?
Yes, using the comparison microscope, I compared both casings to each other, looking for the same markings or same individual pattern created by the firearm.
And based on your expert opinion, what was the conclusion of your analysis, sir?
I was able to determine that they were fired in the same unknown firearm at the time. I did not have a firearm to examine.
What part of the markings, and maybe you could use the little diagram there, what part of the markings on the casings did you use to do your comparison, sir?
Specifically, there were markings on the primer itself. Again, the individual pattern or the individual markings from the gun are impressed onto the casing. So what I did was I looked under the microscope and compared the markings on the primer, and the markings were the same.
Now, when a bullet, a cartridge, is impacted in the back by the primer, the bullet goes out forward. Does the cartridge case go backward and get some additional markings at that point?
Yes, actually it happens simultaneously. When the cartridge detonates, as the bullet is traveling down the barrel, the casing is pushing back up against the slide. The slide is the top part of the firearm, which moves back and forth. That casing is pushing back up against the slide, and that's where the markings come from that are imparted onto the casing itself.
Is it also sometimes referred to maybe as breach, the breaching face?
Yeah, the technical name of the back of the slide is actually called the breech face itself. So the breech face and other parts of that part of the firearm, the aperture, which is just the hole that the firing pin comes out of, all of those have individual features, again, that were impressed onto the casing that I was able to use to determine that they were fired from the same firearm.
And did you notify law enforcement that the two casings were fired from the same firearm? You would provide that information to them?
Yes, I issued reports stating that they were fired from the same firearm.
Thank you, sir. Can I have you sit back down? Thank you. Finally, sir, were you assigned a projectile or bullet from FDLE case number 2005-05-17042?
Yes, I was.
And was that a projectile that was labeled as coming from the clothing of Miss Gunther?
Again, I don't have the exactly where it was retrieved from, but I have it listed on the report, last name Gunther, yes.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
You may.
I'm going to approach and show you what's marked in evidence as States 11. Can I have you step down again, sir? I'm sorry.
That's good.
Thank you. Can you take a look at these two items, or the envelope and the projectile, see if you recognize them?
Yes, I don't see, I'm sorry, here, yes, I do have my markings, again, on the envelope, that notes that I did examine the contents of the envelope.
Okay. And this is, once again, would be comparable to, sorry, you're good, a actual projectile or bullet that would come out of the front of the barrel of a gun?
Correct. Well, this is a fired bullet, so it would be a projectile, which is expended out of the muzzle of the firearm.
Did you have an opportunity to examine this projectile?
Yes, what I did, again, standard examination, and I determined that it was a .40 caliber projectile, as I mentioned before, measuring the diameter and also the weight of the projectile. And I was also able to determine that the number of grooves on the projectile were 5 that twist to the right.
So this projectile also had to have been fired from, would it be consistent for being fired from the Smith & Wesson 40 VE?
Yes, again, at the time, that was the only firearm that came up on the database was the 40 Smith & Wesson SW40 VE.
For pistols?
Correct.
Okay. Do you know what the weight of the bullet was when you weighed it, sir?
I can refer to my notes
Yes,
real
sir,
quick.
please.
This bullet weighed 180.6 grains. Again, that's just the weight of that projectile.
And is that within the range of what a .40 caliber projectile would weigh?
Yes.
Now, when you looked at this projectile, can I have you step back down, sir?
Sure.
I'm sorry. When you looked at this projectile, were you able to, in this one, be able to see any individualized markings outside the lanes and grooves, those 5 lanes and grooves and twist to the right? Were you able to do any specific identification with this projectile, or was there any issues with it?
Well, I tried to examine, to determine whether this projectile was fired from the same barrel that the other projectile or the other case was, by looking again for the individual characteristics on the bullet. However, this particular bullet, upon closer examination, was very corroded, and a lot of the, or mostly all of these individual features that I would normally see under a microscope were no longer there.
What would cause that corrosion, and is there any specific time frame that that corrosion can be caused by? I mean, caused from, time frame?
Well, no, there's a lot of different factors that can cause the corrosion. It could be exposure to the elements, and there's really no time frame. It all really depends on what the projectile is exposed to, so there's no way for me to determine how long the projectile had been out in the elements or wherever that would have destroyed a lot of those individual details. So again, I was not able to determine whether they were fired from the same firearm or not.
Now, in your experience over the course of your career, have you seen projectiles be damaged like this or corroded in as little as a day or several days, depending on the elements in the area?
Sure, sometimes it can happen rather quickly. Sometimes it could be out in the elements for weeks and not be corroded. It really all depends on the specific circumstances of that particular projectile. So yes, I've had all ranges of levels of corrosion with projectiles.
Now I'm going to show you the projectile from the Julie Green, which is number 17, and this is number 11. When we look at them in comparison, they both have the same 5 landing grooves and the right twist to them.
Correct.
So they're both were fired from the same type of firearm, or could have been fired from the same type of firearm?
Yes, well, they both display the 5 grooves that twisted to the right, correct, and they're the same caliber and design of bullet.
What about a full, we've heard the term earlier, a full metal jacket. Can you describe to the jury what that is and what these type of projectiles specifically here are?
Both of these bullets are what are called full metal jacket, and full metal jacket is just a term that's used to describe the design of the projectile, in which a full metal jacket is a projectile that has a lead core, a lead center, which is surrounded by a jacket of some metal type. It could be copper, it could be brass, and then the bottom is exposed lead. If you were to look at these projectiles and look at the bottom, it just shows the core, the lead center. You can just see it from the bottom. Another design would be, for example, a hollow point. A lot of people have heard of that. Hollow point bullet. A hollow point bullet is just a different design in which the nose or the tip of the bullet has a cavity on the nose, which upon impact is designed to expand and open up. Sometimes the term is called mushroom because it opens up. And that is designed specifically to cause more impact, cause more damage upon impact, excuse me. So again, going back to these two specific things, it's just called full metal jacket, which is just a design of this particular projectile.
And these both are full metal jacket bullets?
Correct.
Now, let me sit down for just a sec. jacket bullets. Have you, in your career, analyzed multiple full metal jacket bullets that were involved in homicides?
Yes, yes.
If you had to give a percentage of, cases or just an estimate, do you think you've seen more full metal jacket bullets that are involved in homicides or more hollow point bullets?
I've probably seen more, a vast majority have probably been full metal jacket. It's a pretty common type of projectile.
So if some people refer to it as range ammo, that doesn't preclude it from being a bullet that can kill somebody?
Range ammo, typically it's kind of just a term loosely, from my experience, is a term used just ammunition that is purchased at a firing range. Usually it's much cheaper, but it doesn't have anything to do with the design, whether it's designed to kill or anything like that. It's just where the ammunition is purchased and whether it's made cheaply or not.
And are you familiar with the American Eagle, not store at the mall, but American Eagle ammunition?
Yes, it's pretty typical ammunition that's purchased in any sporting goods store. A lot of sporting goods stores have it.
And the American Eagle ammunition, is that stamped with a Federal on the top?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's Federal is a manufacturer, and they sometimes brand under different names, and American Eagle is one of them.
Both of these casings, were they stamped with Federal, do you recall, sir? Or could you?
I'd have to refer to my notes just to double check. Yes, both were stamped Federal cartridge case. Actually, both were stamped Federal on the head stamp itself.
Thank you, sir. And throughout the course of this investigation, you were with FDLE for a while. Did you receive other bullets and casings to compare to the ones in the case that you found?
Yes, I was provided multiple submissions of both casings and fired projectiles to compare to these two cases to determine whether the same firearm was used.
And through the course of your examination of all those items that were submitted to you, did you ever find any other casings or projectiles that matched up to the casing that you had that was identifiable, or the two casings identifiable, or the projectile that was identifiable?
No, the only two casings that I was able to identify as being fired from the same firearm were the two casings from Green and Patton.
Thank you, sir. May I have just a moment, Judge?
Yes.
No further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Hello, Mr. Felix.
Hi, how are you?
Going back to the last cartridge in the Gunther case, did you indicate that the projectile that you examined was so corroded that you were unable to make an examination to determine the length of time, in other words, how old it was?
Correct. There was no way to determine how old or when that projectile was fired. Correct.
And you indicated that would a projectile corrode over 24 hours?
It could. It's possible. I don't know if a projectile could corrode in 24 hours, but sure, it's possible.
But going to the condition of this particular projectile found in the Miss Gunther's case, could it be several weeks old, several months old by its condition?
It could be. Again, it was pretty heavily corroded, but again, there's just no way for me to determine how long it had been out.
Yeah. And following up on that statement, there's no way to scientifically or definitively indicate that it was deposited on the date of her death as an example on December 25th and 26th, 2005. Is that correct? There's no way to make that determination.
That would be beyond my expertise. I don't know if there actually is a way to determine that. I don't know. I'm not a metallurgist, so I don't know if there's a way to calculate that.
Yes,
But
sir.
I wouldn't be able to do that, no.
Okay. And you did not, obviously.
No, I did not, no.
And were you able to match that projectile, other than the grooves that it was fired from a Smith & Wesson pistol? That was the only, because of the lands and grooves?
Correct. Because the numbers of grooves that twisted to the right, 5 to the right, that was the extent of the examination, because under the microscope, all of those individual details had been corroded off or worn away.
Now, you also indicated that you examined numerous other projectiles and casings that were submitted to determine whether they had any connection with the case. Is that correct?
Correct.
Were you able to determine whether those projectiles had the left and right turn that subjected that they were also fired from a Smith & Wesson handgun?
Most of the projectiles that were submitted did have the 5 grooves and twisted to the right. Again, because since it was a specific firearm, most of the firearms evidence submitted did have the 5 grooves and twisted to the right.
Did Smith & Wesson, 2004, 2005, to your knowledge, did they produce any other type of guns, like 9mm or other 40 caliber type of pistols?
Correct. There were a number of models that Smith & Wesson produced that year. It's something that's common. They'll manufacture different models throughout the years.
Yes, sir. Going to the Iwana Patton case, is it correct to say that you received a projectile and a cartridge casing on that case that you examined?
The Iwana Patton, no, what I received actually were 2.
Oh, I apologize. Let me go back one.
Okay.
To Julie Green.
Okay. Yes, what I received in the Julie Green case were a fired projectile, 40 caliber, 10mm, and 1 fired casing.
Were you able to determine in that case to project the age of that projectile?
No, again, there's no way to determine when it was actually fired itself.
And you were examining mostly for firearm forensics, and you didn't examine to see if there was any blood present on that projectile, or do you know whether it was ever examined?
The projectile itself, part of the examination is to determine if there's any trace evidence, any blood, hairs, or fibers on the projectile itself. And all I did note was that there was some dirt and some what appeared to be dirt and sand on the firearm. But I don't do any type of biological testing, so I don't know if there was actually blood on the projectile itself.
The issue is you didn't determine anything other than the dirt on the projectile.
When it comes to trace evidence, like hairs and fibers and biological material, correct. It's just an observation.
Do you know whether it was examined by another FDLE expert for that regard before or after you made the examination for firearm forensics?
I don't have any specific, if I could just refer to my notes here. I don't believe it was. I don't have any notes that it was examined by any other analyst before myself,
Yes.
other than a crime scene that collected the evidence.
Were you able to determine, or did your analysis include, the fact that that projectile came from that cartridge?
Oh, as far as if the bullet and cartridge case were once one
Yes.
component. There really is no way to do that. In very rare occasions, if there's something unusual, the bullet or projectile cannot be determined if it was actually fired from a from a specific casing itself. The markings on each are marked by different parts of the gun. So there's no way to determine whether the casing and the bullet were once one unit.
And I think you may have already answered this, but let me be sure I'm correct. The casing in the Julie Green case is not necessarily fired from a specific identifiable Smith & Wesson manufactured gun. It could be fired from other Smith & Wesson manufactured type models.
The casing itself?
Yes, sir.
The casing itself, there were no distinctive features that would indicate that it was fired from a Smith & Wesson pistol. Those indicative of the Smith & Wesson pistol were from the projectile, but the casing, no, there were no features on it itself that exclusively said it could have been fired from a Smith & Wesson pistol, correct?
And so you also then examined a casing from the Iwana Green homicide.
Iwana Patton?
I apologize.
That's okay.
On Miss Patton as well as Miss Green.
Correct.
And you made a comparison there. And what were the results of that comparison?
When I examined the casings, I was able to determine that they were fired from the same unknown firearm.
And you used the term unknown, meaning any other type of weapon manufactured, well, presumably, well, we don't know who manufactured the cartridge except what it says on the casing.
Correct. All that it is known is that they were fired from the same firearm, and the firearms were a .40 Smith & Wesson caliber firearm. Not to alleviate confusion, but it also could be a 10 millimeter firearm also. But it's the same unknown firearm.
From a Smith & Wesson type, which could have included a 9 millimeter, a 45, possibly if they manufactured it, a 40 caliber, of which you examined many others, of course, that came from different weapons.
No. What happens is that it could not have been a 9 millimeter pistol or a 45 auto pistol. Because those are different sizes. However, the manufacturer is something I couldn't determine. In other words, there was no way for me to say that the cartridge case was fired from a Smith & Wesson firearm. And the reason is because there were, again, no distinct markings on the cartridge case that pointed to a Smith & Wesson firearm. So the caliber could not have been from a 9 millimeter Luger or a 45 auto, again, because it's a different size.
Because it's marked on the casing.
On the casing itself,
Yeah,
correct,
okay.
correct.
Are there other manufacturers that manufacture a 40 caliber firearm other than Smith & Wesson?
Absolutely. There are an entire list of manufacturers, hundreds of manufacturers that will manufacture firearms that could fire a .40 Smith & Wesson caliber cartridge.
Okay, and we're looking at the cartridge casing here. So if I'm correct, if I don't want to misstate your statement, but Are you saying that these cartridge casings are not exclusively fired from a Smith & Wesson? That's the casings.
Correct. What may be causing some confusion is the term 40 Smith & Wesson, 40 S&W, which is stamped on the cartridge. The S&W portion that's stamped on the cartridge is just a designator of that cartridge. Quick historical issue is that Smith & Wesson was actually the company that designed that cartridge, so they stamped their name on it. So that's the only reason why. But that cartridge could be fired in any firearm manufactured by any manufacturer that will fire that cartridge. So I know there's some confusion when the term Smith & Wesson is used, but hopefully that clarified.
Yes, sir, you have.
Okay.
And thank you for your testimony. I have one additional question.
Sure.
Thank you. When you examine the projectiles with their turns and grooves, could they have been fired from a pistol? A Smith & Wesson pistol?
Yes, well, that was the only actual manufacturer on the list
Yeah.
that could have fired that revolver at that time. Was a Smith & Wesson pistol that had 5 grooves that twisted to the right, correct?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anything else?
I was asked to ask one more question, Your Honor, by my client.
Go ahead.
I asked the question, could it have been fired from another Smith & Wesson pistol? But the question I need to ask, could it be fired from another Smith & Wesson firearm?
Another Smith & Wesson?
The automatic.
Yes, the only firearm that came up on the list was a Smith & Wesson pistol.
Okay, thank you very much. A revolver is the question I was asking.
Oh, yes, well, on the list was a Smith & Wesson revolver, yes, but that was, like I said, inconsistent with the rest of the evidence, so that's why I researched to determine what other firearms may have been possible.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Any redirect?
Just real briefly, Judge. In order to make your determination that, and to provide your information to law enforcement that the bullet in the casing came from what you thought was a Smith & Wesson 40 VE, you didn't look at the casing in a vacuum. Did you look at the casing in conjunction with the projectile to make your expert determination to refer to law enforcement from the green location?
Well, both are two independent pieces of evidence, and because I can't determine they were once one unit, I have to look at them independently. So that information is what I gave to the investigators. The fact that the list of possible firearms that may have fired the bullet were the S&W 40 VE pistol, and also that information was given to investigators, but then also the fact that the cartridge case could have only been fired from a pistol. So that was the information given to the investigators, but they are treated independently of each other.
Of course, but when you put them together, it kind of makes a conclusion for the investigators to make.
For the investigators, and talking to the investigators, yes.
In reference to the corroded projectile, the evidence was collected on December 26th, which would have been how long before you actually got the piece of evidence?
Can I look at my report? The corroded bullet I examined in March of 2006, so it would have been 3 or so months after the December date.
Would it be fair to say you don't know what is occurring in the envelope that projectile is in during those 3-month time window?
No, it's just packaged in an envelope.
There's nothing special about your packaging that prevents corrosion?
No, it's just a manila envelope is where it's typically stored.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down. I don't know if either counsel needs them to remain under subpoena. I'll allow you to do that.
The state does not, Judge.
Okay, and you're released from the subpoena. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
All right, it's 4:30. My inclination is to wrap it up at this time. You have another witness?
Can we come sidebar, Judge?
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and make the administrative decision to wrap it up for the day. It's been a long day. It's my understanding the next witness would be an hour long, and that's just way too long. So, I'm gonna go ahead and release you at this time, and, once again, explain to you not to do any investigation on your own, not to speak with anyone, not to follow any news media accounts of what is going on in the courtroom. Don't do any of those things. Don't let anybody talk to you about the case or talk to anyone about the case, and that also includes each other. Do not talk about the case while you're in the jury room. So I'll release you until tomorrow. Be here about 8:45, same time as today, so we can get started right at 9. See you tomorrow. Thank you.
Could you leave your pad face down, please?
Oh. Good night. Okay, just before we wrap it up, you got there's calendar for the rest of the week. I should have told them that. It's gonna be, tomorrow is Tuesday?
Yes, sir.
Tuesday, all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday. Thursday will be a half day to allow for the defense's.
Can I ask, Judge, if we could maybe convene on Thursday at like 12? We'll see as we get closer, because since we're not going to stay late, we might be a couple hours off, but we'd still like to try and get done by Thursday.
We
So
can.
if they're, yeah, because I don't anticipate, and they'll know better, but his evaluation should be a couple hours. So if we start at 12, have him grab an early lunch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all right?
Thank you, Judge.
Another administrative issue, Your Honor, as you know, I have been denied my cause for staying here by JC. They want a hearing. I don't know if they want to do it after the trial, or it could be long for the hearing.
We can do it one day at 8:30, you know?
Yes, sir.
But you have to be here on time. I know you're here
Oh,
on
no,
time.
it's with Your Honor.
I understand that, and JAC,
Yes, sir.
yeah, so we can do it at 8:30 any day, so long as everyone is here on time.
I can do that.
So if somebody shows up late, then we can't do it. I don't want to delay the jury.
Oh, no, I
All
never
right.
do that.
Okay, then I'll have my staff contact JAC. Do you have the person you're dealing with, the name?
Is it Kristen Lake? Kristen Lake, Your Honor.
Okay, then if you don't mind, just do a very small motion, so we can have it part of the court file, so we can give them notice and schedule the hearing.
Yes, sir, I have already filed.
Oh, you did, okay.
Yes, sir.
Do you know which one it is?
Yes, it would be a motion,
The number in the court file?
Your Honor, I know the JC requires a few days' notice on these things,
Well,
just so you don't get
he
caught.
said he would hear it quickly.
Okay.
Okay. I don't want to ex parte you guys by calling them, so I guess we'll just have to do it as a formal hearing. What was the motion called?
Is the next party motion for payment of attorney fees and travel? Document filed
so it's number 284, I think. I think it's 284.
I think my assistant found one as well, Your Honor. One for retroactive, none for time for whatever. You my hotel, travel time or something.
Well,
Should be two of them.
I think it's, okay, yeah. It's 384, so we'll set it for hearing, okay? All right, thank you. All right, we'll be in recess till tomorrow.
8:45 is great.
8:45, yeah, trying to be here on time.
No, I was here on time the last 2 days.
Oh, okay.
Jules, we're done for the day. I gotta just clean up, some stuff together.